Hey, good people. Welcome back to this week's lecture. And I want to tell you that this week we're kind of combining chapters 3 and chapters 4. So we're going to be talking about building relationships and also loving relationships and what that looks like for us within the family unit. But it's interesting the way that chapter 3 begins in that it starts out, with an exploration of being single, of what singlehood means. Come on, good people. What type of singlehood, if you are single, or when you were single, what type of singlehood did you fall into? Was it voluntary or was it involuntary? Was it temporary or was it stable? What does singlehood look like for you? I just think that this is really interesting, the theory and the typology that's explained here, because it does give us, honestly, this opportunity to kind of analyze and to really think about what we're thinking about when it comes down to why we are single. And again, the elements or the variables that played into us being single when we were single, or if we still are single. Okay, but as we move on in chapter 3, it talks about, again, when we're looking at relationships, it talks about the types of friendships and cultivating friendships based on, gender differences. The book kind of explores a little bit, very briefly, how men are more kind of toe the line type of relationship, not very emotionally attached, not very personal sometimes or intimate in creating a relationship. And again, that's from a theoretical perspective, whereas women are very intimate, emotionally attached, and kind of create relationships in a meaningful way that's going to help in their interaction. Now that's looking at a gender perspective. What about when we create relationships and friendships, I should say, based on race and ethnicity, based on our social class? One of the questions that the book kind of challenges us to think about is the whole idea about cross-sex friendships, relationships or friendships between men and women. Can they be just friendships? Come on, y'all. What are you thinking? What are you thinking? That may be a question that you may want to ask a family member, maybe a family member in a next generation, your parents, your grandparents, auntie, uncle. What are their thoughts about if men and women can be just friends? Now, as we're talking about cultivating relationships and growing in relationships, the book gets into this area where we're talking about dating, courtship, and trying to find that forever love. Sorry, y'all, I had to go there. Okay, so when we're talking about dating and courtship, we kind of look at things from a historical perspective, and we're going to examine this from a micro level perspective as well as a macro level perspective. So when we're thinking about courtship from a micro level perspective, we look at it in terms of from the colonial days, what courtship used to look like. And at that point in time in colonial days, there was a term that was given to it, and it was called "I'm calling on someone," meaning that there was a young man who was interested in courting a young girl, and he would go to the parents' home, and there would be this interaction, supervised interaction between male and female there in the family home. But then, as we talked about in chapter 1, good people, families continue to change over time. We come down to industrialization, urbanization, and dare I say, consumerism. Oh my goodness. And what role does consumerism play in dating, courtship, and in finding a mate? First, let's talk about industrialization. When we're looking at industrialization and we think about how the family system has changed. If you recall back in chapter 2, we were looking at sometimes relationships are defined based on our developmental level or that developmental theory. When we're at this place of defining relationships and at this place of adolescence, we have to ask ourselves, how are we in this stage of adolescence defining the importance of a relationship and the expected behavior in a relationship? Now, from a macro perspective, when we're looking at it, the dating, courtship, and mateship, we're looking at part of that comes in that consumerism. What influences the decisions that we make? Now, hold on, good people, hold on. I know we think we're choosing Mr. Right, Miss Right. I know we think we're doing that. But when we look at it from a macro perspective, what other elements in our social functioning interact or impact the way that we choose a mate, how we're dating, what the dating script may look like? When we're talking about the dating script, again, we're looking at the position that folks may be functioning in and what is our expected behavior. What is the expected interaction that's taking place? This is somewhat defined based on our gender, based on our race, ethnicity, and our social class. So I need you to think about these things, good people. Again, we're looking at it from a macro perspective. Again, coming down to that micro perspective. Like I said, I think we believe that we are choosing our forever somebody. But how is that impacted by that macro view? What are some of the dating trends that we see? We are inundated, could I say that right now, with the video dating. Swipe right, swipe left, swipe up, swipe down. I don't care where you're swiping, but swipe to meet somebody. How are we meeting them? Who are we meeting? Where are we meeting them? Who do we count as being part of those eligible folks that are deserving of our time and our energy? These are things that we got to think about, again, from a micro perspective when we're looking for that special someone. So we go all the way back and considering, again, the statuses that we looked at in chapter 2. Those are the same variables that kind of hit home when we're talking about friendship and relationships, dating and courtship. Again, social class, race, ethnicity, gender, sex, sexuality, all of that factors in to this whole concept of what am I doing when I'm trying to cultivate a friendship, relationships, and how does that look like, or I should say, how does that look when I'm introducing that into the family system? This is where we get into, as we go through developmental stages, when we get into, of course, our young adult stage and actually our middle age stage, this whole area of cohabitation. Come on, good people, talk to me. What are your thoughts about cohabitation? Is it still wrong? Is it still, as the book describes, living in sin? My dad used to tell us you can buy a cow. Why buy the cow when you get the milk for free? That's what he used to tell my sister and I, so that we had an understanding of his thoughts of cohabitation. Don't give yourself away for free. That's my dad, y'all. That's not everybody's father. So the question becomes that we're looking at in this chapter: who participates in cohabitation? How are children factored into the concept of cohabitation? What is the impact on children with cohabitation? When people are living together, do we find that happens before their first marriage, maybe after a marriage, and I don't really want to get married again? How does the marriage, if you're cohabitating, how does that impact the marital union? Does it look like that cohabitation is a good thing for marriage, or is it a bad thing for marriage? All of that is in chapter 3. When we're talking about the relationships, and cohabitation, one of the last things that the chapter 3 talks about is same-sex intimate relationships. The one thing that we have to have an understanding of, good people, is that the similarities are there, whether it is heterosexual or same-sex, when we're talking about feeling comfortable and confident in a relationship, how we're choosing relationships, what that role may be in a relationship, and also in cohabitation. We got to understand that those same issues, let me go back a slide, are still there. Who's living together? Where are you finding them? Is it still considered living in sin? Especially considering that legislatively, legally, we have accepted same-sex marriage. I said legally, because culturally, where are we? If I'm stepping on a toe, just say ouch, but just think about this culturally. Where are we when it comes down to same-sex intimate relationships and marriage? Are we as accepting of it as we are legally accepting of it? That's chapter 3, y'all. Chapter 4, we begin talking about loving relationships. And what does love look like in a relationship? How do we define love? The book kind of begins by defining love in two ways, with a romantic love and a compassionate type of love. When we think about that romantic love, the characteristics of being filled with passion, of excitement, of just wanting and longing to being with this particular person. That compassionate love is one in which we could say something that grows over time. It is one that, what may have started as that romantic love, or lust, however you want to see it, y'all. But then it kind of grows into this compassionate love, meaning that I appreciate you as a friend, but also that compassionate love falls into friendship as well. Meaning that I can tell my best friend that I love you and I love you with all that I am. That's that compassionate love, meaning that I care for you, not so much a romantic, lustful type of love. If lust is love. Let me stop, y'all. Let me go ahead on. When we talk, I'm sorry, when we talk about loving relationships, our book kind of explores loving relationships from a biological and chemical perspective, as well. And then we have different theories that we're going to be looking at. From a biological and chemical perspective, we'll say that sociobiology, meaning that we have this impulse, this biological impulse, just to love. As humans, we have a desire to belong. We have a desire to be part of, for lack of a better word, a pack. Like if we were dogs, we have a longing to be a part of a pack animal or to be part of the pack. And so we have that biology of wanting to belong. So when we think about the theoretical perspectives or the theories on love, there's one theory that I want to highlight specifically from chapter 4, and that's Sternberg's triangular theory of love. When he talks about love, he talks of I need to get my little mouse together. He talks about love from based on intimacy, based on attachment or contentment, intimacy, passion, and contentment. When we talk about Sternberg's theory of love, he then talks about that there's 8 different levels or 8 different types of love that you find in his entire theory. There's also, real quickly, going to mention a theory that's from John Lees. He talks about his type of love, and then Reese's wheel theory of love. Those were also mentioned in chapter 4. But when we're looking at Sternberg's love types, we got to ask ourselves, where do we fall in line with these love types with the relationships that we have? Not meaning that every relationship is going to have that compassionate type of love or that romantic type of love, but maybe, maybe I'm just infatuated with you. Maybe I have a girl crush. Maybe I just really like you. Where do we fall in line when we're defining what love looks like for us? So that's that micro level perspective of love. When we get down to the macro level perspective, again, going back to chapter 3 and some of the information that was covered there, but basically that consumerism, what is controlling the development of our love? From a macro perspective, when we look at defining relationships and defining love, sometimes depending on our culture, that relationship, that love can be dictated by what the cultural expectations are, what the cultural norms may be. And so we see that sometimes in arranged marriages. We see that sometimes when we're looking at not so much a social class system, but a caste system. When we're talking about how people are going to be maintained within the level, the lifestyle that they are used to in that level that they were born into, or the caste system that they were born into. When we experience love, y'all, there is love across the board, based on gender experiences, based on sex, based on sexuality. There is love in the air that kind of defines the way that we may interact one with another. How we experience love from a micro level determines the way that we interact and how we define love and the elements that influence love from a macro level. Then we always have this last issue that I want to talk about, that unrequited love. The unrequited love, y'all, how do we deal with that? How have we dealt with that? Because let's be honest, one with another, we've all gone through experiences where we have experienced that rejection, where I really, really am deep into somebody, but they're just not feeling the same way about me. That unrequited love. How do we deal with that, and how do we make sense of it? That's chapters 3 and chapters 4, looking at relationships and then looking at loving relationships and how we're making sense of all of that in the way that we define the family functioning. I just want you to be mindful, good people, as we're exploring these different issues. This is all revolving around how the family functions as a unit. All right. So, with that being said, I encourage you to read chapters 3 and chapters 4. Read all the articles that are within all of these chapters. And as you're reading the articles, I want you to think about what you're thinking about as it may pertain to you and your family functioning. You have some chapter assignments, and you also have a chapter quiz, and you got some discussion post questions that I have up for you. That being said, y'all know how we close. I bid you love, peace, and bacon grease.